Billionaire enjoyed Christmas Eve until a photo of his ex in the hospital changed his night. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. Theo Blackthorne adjusted his Rolex for the third time in 10 minutes, standing in the marble foyer of his sister's Connecticut estate. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the living room, mixing with Christmas carols and the clinking of champagne glasses. He'd rather be anywhere else. Uncle Theo, his 6-year-old nephew Marcus, crashed into his legs, nearly spilling eggnog on his custom Armani suit. Easy there, by Theo forced a smile, steadying the boy. Christmas had always felt like a performance to him. Forced joy, mandatory gatherings, the pretense that everything was perfect when it never was. Come see the tree. It's huge. Marcus grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the chaos. The Blackthorne family Christmas was in full swing. His sister Catherine had outdone herself this year, transforming her home into a winter wonderland, complete with a 12-foot Douglas fir and enough twinkling lights to power a small city. Extended family members filled every corner, their voices creating a warm buzz that should have been comforting, but only made Theo feel more isolated. "You look miserable," Catherine whispered, appearing beside him with a glass of bourbon. At 42, she was the only person who could read him completely. "I'm here, aren't I?" Physically, she studied his face with the same analytical precision that had made her a successful attorney. "When's the last time you actually enjoyed Christmas?" The answer came immediately. 2 years ago, when Aspen had convinced him to build a snowman in Central Park at midnight. She'd worn his oversized coat and laughed until tears froze on her cheeks. That night, Christmas had felt possible. Love had felt possible. "I'm fine, Cat." "No, you're not. You've been walking around like a ghost for months." She lowered her voice. "Have you talked to her?" Theo's jaw tightened. "There's nothing to talk about, really, because last I checked, walking away from someone you love while they're carrying your child isn't exactly a conversation ender." The words hit him like a physical blow. Aspen had been 3 months pregnant when everything imploded. 3 months of their child growing inside her while they tore each other apart with words that couldn't be taken back. He'd known about the pregnancy, had been there for the first ultrasound appointment where they'd heard the heartbeat together. But after that final fight in July, the one where she'd accused him of being just like his father, emotionally unavailable and selfish, he'd retreated into his work. Real estate deals were simpler than feelings, contracts were clearer than conversations about the future, and walking away was easier than admitting he was terrified of becoming the kind of father who disappointed his children the way his own father had disappointed him. "She made it clear she didn't need me," he said, taking a long drink. "Or maybe she needed you to fight for her, instead of proving her point by disappearing." Before Theo could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He glanced at it dismissively, then froze. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. The image showed Aspen in a hospital bed, her dark blonde hair damp with sweat, exhaustion written across her delicate features. But her blue eyes, those eyes that had haunted his dreams for months, were focused on the tiny bundle in her arms. A baby with a shock of dark hair, and the smallest fingers he'd ever seen. His daughter. The phone slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, clattering on the marble floor. Catherine bent to retrieve it, and her sharp intake of breath told him she'd seen the image, too. "Oh my God, Theo." The room around him seemed to fade. The laughter, the music, the warmth. All he could see was Aspen, pale and beautiful, holding their child, their daughter, who had apparently decided to arrive a week early on Christmas Eve of all nights, while he stood here in his expensive suit, making polite conversation about quarterly profits and market projections. The woman he loved had given birth to their baby, alone. When was this taken? Catherine's voice sounded distant. Theo checked the timestamp with trembling hands. 23 minutes ago. 23 minutes ago, he'd become a father, and he'd missed it. The weight of the moment crashed over him like a tsunami. 5 months of silence. 5 months of telling himself he was protecting them both by staying away. 5 months of lying to himself that he could live without her. "I have to go." The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Theo waked, but he was already moving toward the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The distance to Mount C Hospital had never felt so vast or so urgent, because somewhere in that building, Aspen was holding their daughter, probably wondering if she'd be raising her alone. He couldn't let that happen. Not anymore. What happens when a man who spent months running from his greatest fear, finally realizes what he's about to lose forever. Theo's Tesla cut through the Manhattan streets like a blade through silk, the city's Christmas Eve glow blurring past his windows in streaks of red and gold. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and his heart hammered a relentless rhythm against his ribs. Mount Sinai Hospital, room 847. He'd called 3 times during the drive, but each attempt had gone straight to voicemail. Aspen's voice, recorded months ago, when things between them still held hope. "Hi, you've reached Aspen. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." He'd hung up each time without speaking. What could he possibly say in 30 seconds that would explain 5 months of silence? The valet took his keys without comment, though Theo caught the man's surprised glance at his formal attire. Most fathers arriving for Christmas Eve births probably weren't wearing 1,000 suits and cufflinks inherited from dead grandfathers. The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt eternal. Each floor that lit up, 3, 4, 5, brought him closer to a moment he'd imagined countless times but never thought would actually come. What would Aspen say when she saw him? What would his daughter look like? Did she have Aspen's delicate bone structure or his stubborn jaw? The maternity ward smelled like disinfectant and new beginnings. A nurse with kind eyes and silver hair looked up from her station as he approached. "I'm looking for Aspen Reed. She had a baby." The nurse's expression softened. "Room 847. Are you family?" The word stuck in his throat. What was he? The ex who'd abandoned them, the father who'd missed everything that mattered. "I'm the baby's father." She nodded toward the hallway down the hall, last room on the right. "But sir," she touched his arm gently. "She's been through a lot tonight." The labor was challenging. The word echoed in his head as he walked down the corridor, his dress shoes silent on the polished linoleum. Through open doorways, he glimpsed other scenes of joy. Families clustered around new mothers, fathers cradling impossibly small bundles, grandparents weeping happy tears. He'd missed all of that. The labor, the first cry, the moment when his daughter took her first breath while he'd been making small talk about real estate markets and dodging his nephew's sticky fingers. Aspen had been fighting to bring their child into the world, alone. Room 847's door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see a sliver of the room, pale blue walls, a window overlooking the city, and the foot of a hospital bed. He raised his hand to knock, then froze as he heard her voice. "I know you're probably hungry again, little one." Aspen's tone was soft, exhausted, but filled with wonder. The nurse said, "You're perfect. 8 pounds 2 ounces, 21 in long, and those eyes, they're just like your daddy's." Theo's breath caught. She was talking to their daughter about him. After everything, the fights, the silence, the months of believing she was better off without him, she was telling their baby about him. He pushed the door open slowly. Aspen looked up and time seemed to fracture. She was sitting upright in the hospital bed, wearing a soft pink gown that made her look younger than her 31 years. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and exhaustion had painted shadows beneath her eyes. But she was beautiful, more beautiful than he remembered, if that was possible. In her arms, wrapped in a white blanket with tiny pink flowers, was their daughter, Theo. His name on her lips was barely a whisper, carrying equal parts shock and something else he couldn't quite identify. I got a photo by mistake. I think a nurse sent it to me instead of." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Instead of someone who mattered. Instead of someone who deserved to be here." Aspen's eyes glistened. "Miranda must have hit your number instead of my sister's. They're right next to each other in my contacts. An accident? He was here because of an accident, not because she'd wanted him here." The realization hit him like a physical blow. "I can go," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. When I saw the photo, I had to make sure you were both okay." "No." The word came out stronger than she probably intended. "No, don't go. Not yet." She shifted carefully, and he caught his first clear glimpse of their daughter's face. The baby was awake, her dark eyes, his eyes, seeming to focus on something beyond the hospital room ceiling. She had Aspen's delicate nose and his stubborn chin, a perfect fusion of everything they'd once dreamed of creating together. He couldn't find words adequate enough. "Her name is Luna," Aspen said softly. Luna, Catherine Reed. Catherine she'd given their daughter, his sister's name, as a middle name. After everything that had happened between them, she'd still honored his family. "Can I?" He gestured helplessly toward the bed. Aspen nodded, scooting over slightly to make room. He approached slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. When he sat on the edge of the bed, Luna turned her head toward him, and their eyes met for the first time. Everything else, the months of anger, the justified resentment, the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart, crumbled in an instant. This was his daughter. This perfect, impossible little person was half him, half the woman he'd never stopped loving, and completely, utterly, his responsibility. And he'd almost missed her entirely. The silence in room 847 stretched between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Luna made soft snuffling sounds against Aspen's chest, completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the air around her tiny form. Theo couldn't stop staring at his daughter. Every detail seemed impossibly precious. The way her miniature fingers curled against the blanket, the dark fuzz of hair that caught the light, the serious expression on her face as if she was contemplating the mysteries of her new world. She came fast, Aspen said quietly, breaking the spell. 3 hours of labor. The doctor said that was unusual for a first baby. Did you have anyone with you? The question scraped against his throat like broken glass. My sister flew in from Portland 2 days ago. She's getting coffee. Aspen's voice carried no accusation, but somehow that made it worse. Miranda stayed with me through most of it. Miranda, her younger sister, who'd never liked him, who'd warned Aspen from the beginning that dating a man like Theo Blackthorne was asking for heartbreak. Miranda, who'd probably spent the last 5 months telling Aspen she was better off without him, and she'd been right. Aspen, he started to speak, but Luna chose that moment to stretch, her tiny mouth opening in a perfect yawn that stopped his words cold. She's been sleeping most of the time since she was born, Aspen murmured, her voice taking on that soft maternal tone he'd never heard before. The nurse says, that's normal. All that work getting into the world. Would it be okay if I held her? The request hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Aspen studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. Fear, regret, the desperate longing he couldn't hide. You don't have to ask permission, Theo. She's your daughter, too. The words hit him harder than any accusation could have. Your daughter, too. As if he'd earned that title, as if he deserved to claim any part of this miracle he'd done nothing to deserve. But Aspen was already lifting Luna, carefully adjusting the blanket around her tiny body. Support her head, she instructed as she transferred the baby to his arms. Like this. The moment Luna settled against his chest, Theo's entire world shifted on its axis. She was so small, so impossibly light, but she carried the weight of everything he'd never believed he could have. Her warmth seeped through his dress shirt, and when she made a soft sound and nestled closer to him, he felt something crack open in his chest. Hello, little one, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I'm sorry I'm late. Aspen's sharp intake of breath made him look up. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her expression was unreadable. Why now? She asked softly. Why are you here now, Theo? The question he'd been dreading, the one he didn't have a good answer for, because the truth made him sound like exactly the selfish bastard she'd accused him of being. I saw the photo and I realized I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Which mistake would that be? Her voice carried an edge now, the protective steel he remembered from their worst fights. Walking away when I told you I was pregnant. Disappearing after we found out the gender. Or maybe it was ignoring my calls for 3 months straight. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Luna stirred in his arms, her face scrunching as if she could sense the tension around her. All of it, he said quietly. Every single choice I made after July was wrong. You know what the hardest part was? Aspen's voice broke slightly. It wasn't doing this alone. I'm strong enough for that. It was wondering if you'd ever want to know her, if you'd look at her and see a mistake instead of a gift. Aspen, no, never that. Then what? Theo, because for 5 months, you made it pretty clear that she wasn't important enough to fight for. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the words wouldn't come because they both knew she wasn't. He had walked away. He had let fear make his decisions. He had convinced himself that leaving was noble when it was really just cowardice dressed up in expensive clothing. Luna made a soft sound and opened her eyes, focusing on his face with that intense newborn gaze that seemed to see straight through to his soul. In her dark eyes, so much like his own, he saw everything he'd almost thrown away. I was terrified, he admitted. My father was. He was absent even when he was there. Work was always more important than family, than us. I swore I'd never be like him. But when you got pregnant, all I could think about was how I'd probably screw it up the same way he did. So, You decided to screw it up, preemptively. The observation was so accurate it made him wheeze. Something like that. And what's changed? What makes you think you won't run again the next time things get difficult? It was a fair question, more than fair, and he owed her the truth, even if it destroyed any chance he might have for forgiveness. Because, holding her right now, I finally understand what my father never did. This isn't about me being ready or worthy or capable enough. This is about her deserving a father who shows up even when he's scared, especially when he's scared. Aspen was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if searching for cracks in his conviction. Luna yawned again, completely content in his arms, and Theo felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for months. One chance, Aspen said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. That's all I can give you, Theo. One chance to prove you mean what you're saying. The weight of that offer, the magnitude of her generosity, after everything he'd put her through, nearly brought him to his knees. One chance was more than he deserved, but it was everything he needed. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, dusting the city in crystalline perfection. Christmas morning was only hours away, and for the first time in years, Theo found himself believing in the possibility of miracles. The door to room 847 swung open with more force than necessary, and Miranda Reed stepped inside, carrying 2 steaming coffee cups and wearing an expression that could have frozen the Hudson River. I got you the vanilla latte you wanted, Asper. Her words died as her eyes locked onto Theo sitting on the hospital bed, still cradling Luna against his chest. What the hell is he doing here? Miranda, Aspen warned, her voice tired but firm. Not now. Oh, I think now is exactly the right time. Miranda set the coffee cups down with deliberate precision, her movements controlled but radiating barely contained fury. At 28, she shared Aspen's delicate bone structure but possessed twice the fire. 5 months, Aspen. 5 months of watching you cry yourself to sleep, of holding your hand through doctor's appointments, of listening to you wonder if he'd ever want to know his own child. And he just shows up now. Theo carefully adjusted Luna's blanket, buying himself a moment before meeting Miranda's hostile glare. He'd known this confrontation was coming the moment he decided to drive to the hospital. Miranda had never hidden her disdain for him, even when things between him and Aspen had been good. You're right to be angry, he said quietly. I don't deserve to be here. Damn right you don't. Miranda moved to Aspen's side, her protective instincts in full display. Do you have any idea what she's been through? The appointments she went to alone, the nights she spent researching cribs and car seats because she thought she'd be doing this by herself. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, and they all found their mark. Theo had imagined Aspen moving on, building a life without him, but he'd never allowed himself to picture the specifics, the loneliness, the weight of preparing for motherhood without a partner, the 1,000 small moments when she might have needed him and he wasn't there. I know I can't undo. You can't undo anything, Miranda interrupted, but you can explain why we should believe this isn't just another one of your guilt trips that'll last until something more interesting comes along. Miranda, please. Aspen's voice carried exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. I'm too tired for this fight, but not too tired to let him waltz back in like nothing happened. Luna stirred in Theo's arms, making a soft whimpering sound. Without thinking, he began to rock gently, the motion coming naturally despite his complete lack of experience with babies. The whimpering stopped and Luna settled back into peaceful sleep. Miranda noticed the exchange and for a moment her expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. I'm not here to waltz back into anything, Theo said, his voice low to avoid disturbing Luna. I'm here because I finally realized that running away doesn't make me noble, it makes me a coward. And my daughter deserves better than a coward for a father. Pretty words, Miranda shot back. But you're good at those, aren't you? I remember the pretty words you used to convince Aspen to move in with you. To trust you with her heart, to believe in a future that you threw away the moment things got complicated. The accusation stung because it carried the weight of truth. He had been good with words, had built a relationship with Aspen on promises and possibilities. But when those possibilities became real, when the pregnancy test showed 2 lines and their abstract future suddenly had a due date, he'd revealed himself to be exactly the kind of man Miranda had warned her sister about. You're right, he said simply. I did all of those things. I hurt her in ways that can't be fixed with apologies or explanations. But Miranda looked at her. He nodded toward Luna, who had wrapped one tiny fist around the edge of his shirt collar, anchoring herself to him with unconscious trust. She's here. She's perfect. And whether you believe me or not, whether I deserve it or not. I love her. I loved her before I ever held her, and I'll love her every day for the rest of my life. Miranda's armor of anger cracked slightly. Love isn't enough. Love doesn't pay for daycare or wake up for 3 a.m. feedings or hold her when she has nightmares. You're right about that, too. But I'm not asking you to trust my feelings. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can show up for the practical stuff. The daily, ordinary, unglamorous parts of being a father. And when your next business crisis hits, when some deal requires you to fly to Tokyo for 3 weeks, what then? It was a fair question, one that cut to the heart of who he'd always been. Theo Blackthorne, who put work before everything else, who measured his worth in quarterly profits and market dominance, the man who'd inherited his father's empire and his father's inability to prioritize anything that didn't come with a financial return. Then I'll figure out how to handle the crisis without abandoning my family, he said. I'll hire more people, delegate more responsibility, turn down deals that conflict with what matters. I'll do whatever it takes. Easy to say when you're holding a sleeping baby in a hospital room, Miranda said. Harder to do when real life kicks in. You're not wrong. Theo looked down at Luna, who had begun making soft, contented sounds in her sleep. But for the first time in my life, I have something I want more than I want to win, more than I want to prove myself to a father who died disappointed in me anyway. The room fell quiet, except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and Luna's barely audible breathing. Through the window, the snow continued to fall, transforming the harsh edges of the city into something softer, more forgiving. One mistake, Miranda said finally, her voice still hard, but lacking its earlier venom. One single mistake, and I will personally make sure you never see either of them again. Are we clear, Crystal? Aspen had been watching the entire exchange, in silence, her blue eyes moving between her sister and the father of her child, like she was witnessing a negotiation for her future happiness. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but carried the weight of careful consideration. Miranda, I need you to respect my decision here. Whatever that decision ends up being. Miranda's jaw tightened, but she nodded reluctantly. I'm going to get some air, and maybe find that nurse who has your discharge papers. She paused at the door, fixing Theo with one last withering stare. Don't make me regret not calling security. After she left, the room seemed to exhale, releasing tension neither of them had fully realized was there. She's protective, Aspen said softly. She should be. Someone should have been protecting you all along. Aspen studied his face, and he wondered if she could see the man he was trying to become beneath the wreckage of who he'd been. Outside, Christmas morning was breaking over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and in his arms his daughter slept peacefully, trusting him to keep her safe, even though he'd already proven himself unworthy of that trust once before. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Aspen's Brooklyn apartment as Theo carried Luna's car seat up 3 flights of narrow stairs. The building was nothing like his penthouse on the Upper East Side. Old radiators that clanged paint that had seen better decades, and the constant hum of neighbors living their lives in close quarters. But as he followed Aspen down the hallway lined with holiday decorations from other tenants, something about the warmth of the space appealed to him in ways his sterile marble fortress never had. It's not much, Aspen said, fumbling with her keys. Her movements were still careful, the physical aftermath of labor making itself known now that the adrenaline had worn off. Let me. Theo shifted Luna's carrier to one arm and took the keys, noting how Aspen's face tightened with pain as she leaned against the doorframe. The doctor had warned them about the recovery period, but seeing her struggle made his chest ache with guilt. The apartment was small but thoughtfully arranged. A compact living room with a well-loved sofa faced a window that overlooked a tree-lined street. Photos covered every available surface. Aspen and Miranda at various ages, family gatherings, friends from her work at the graphic design firm, where she'd been a senior artist before taking maternity leave. What struck him most forcefully was the complete absence of any trace of him. In the 2 years they'd lived together in his penthouse, their lives had been thoroughly intertwined. But here, in the space she'd created for herself and Luna, he might as well have never existed. The nursery is through here, Aspen said, leading him toward a room that had clearly been a home office before its transformation. Theo stepped into the small space and felt his breath catch. The walls were painted a soft, sage green, with delicate white stars scattered across the ceiling. A crib sat beneath the window, surrounded by a rocking chair, a changing table, and shelves lined with books and stuffed animals. Everything was simple, but chosen with obvious care. You did all this yourself? He asked, Setting Luna's carrier beside the crib, Miranda helped with the painting, and my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, insisted on making the mobile. Aspen gestured toward the delicate creation of paper cranes that hung above the crib, each one a different shade of blue and silver. Theo studied the room, trying to calculate how many hours of planning and preparation had gone into creating this perfect space for their daughter. While he'd been drowning himself in acquisition reports and zoning meetings, Aspen had been building a home. Luna began to fuss in her carrier, tiny sounds of displeasure that quickly escalated to full crying. Aspen moved to lift her, but Theo saw her wheeze again. "I've got her," he said, carefully extracting Luna from the carrier. The motion felt more natural now, though he was acutely aware of how much he still had to learn. "What does she need?" "Probably hungry. It's been 3 hours since she ate at the hospital." Aspen settled into the rocking chair with visible relief. "There's formula in the kitchen, second cabinet from the left." Theo nodded and headed for the kitchen, Luna's cries following him down the hall. The space was even smaller than the living room, but organized with the efficiency of someone who knew how to make the most of limited space. As he searched for the formula, he noticed the refrigerator covered with appointment cards, grocery lists, and a calendar marked with doctor's visits, and what looked like prenatal class schedules. Every single entry was in Aspen's handwriting. No evidence of anyone else helping her prepare for this massive life change. By the time he returned with the bottle, Luna's cries had reached a pitch that seemed impossible for such a small creature. Aspen looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes, more pronounced now that they were away from the hospital's fluorescent lighting. "Here, let me try." Theo settled into the chair beside her, cradling Luna against his chest. The moment the bottle touched her lips, the crying stopped, replaced by the eager sounds of feeding. "She has your appetite," Aspen said softly, watching as Luna's tiny hands grasped at the bottle, "and your stubbornness about making her needs known." The comment earned him a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen since walking into that hospital room. For a moment, the tension between them eased, replaced by the shared wonder of watching their daughter discover the world. "This is what I pictured," Aspen said quietly before everything fell apart. "The three of us in the nursery figuring it out together." The admission hung between them, loaded with the weight of everything they'd lost. Thea wanted to tell her they could still have that, but he knew words wouldn't rebuild trust that had been shattered by months of absence. "I need to ask you something," he said instead, "and I need you to be honest, even if you think it'll hurt my feelings." Aspen's expression grew guarded. "Okay, do you have enough money? I mean, for everything she need." Color rose in her cheeks, and he knew immediately he'd touched on a sensitive subject. "I'm not asking for charity, Theo. That's not what I'm offering." He kept his voice gentle, focusing on Luna to avoid making Aspen feel cornered. "I'm asking because I should have been contributing all along, because she's my responsibility, and I've been failing at that responsibility for 5 months. I've managed fine. I'm sure you have. You're capable of managing anything you set your mind to, but managing and thriving aren't the same thing. And I don't want my daughter, our daughter, to have less because of my mistakes." Aspen was quiet for a long moment, watching Luna's eyes grow heavy as she continued to drink. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability he remembered from their early days together. "The maternity leave pay isn't much, and daycare. When I go back to work, it's going to be tight." "It doesn't have to be." Theo finished feeding Luna and carefully lifted her to his shoulder, rubbing her back in small circles the way he'd watched nurses do at the hospital. "I want to help, not to buy my way back into your life, but because it's the right thing to do. And what happens when you decide being a father is too inconvenient? Do the support payments stop, too?" The question was fair, but painful. "I can set up a trust fund, something that ensures Luna's taken care of regardless of what happens between us." Aspen studied his face, clearly weighing his words against her experience of his previous promises. "I don't want to depend on you financially. If you're going to disappear again, then don't depend on me. Depend on the legal documents that will guarantee Luna gets what she needs, whether I'm in the picture or not." Luna let out a small burp against his shoulder, then settled into contented sleep. Through the nursery window, the late afternoon light was fading, transforming the city into a landscape of twinkling lights and shadowed possibilities. "I'll think about it," Aspen said finally. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. For now, that would have to be enough. As Theo carefully transferred Luna to her crib for the first time, watching her tiny chest rise and fall in the gentle rhythm of sleep, He realized this small apartment felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived in years. The clock on Aspen's kitchen wall read 2:47 a.m. when Luna's cries pierced the apartment's stillness. Theo jerked awake from where he'd dozed off on the living room couch, his neck stiff from the awkward angle, and his designer suit wrinkled beyond salvation. He'd insisted on staying despite Aspen's half-hearted protests that she could manage alone. After everything she'd been through in the past 24 hours, the idea of leaving her to handle their newborn's first night home seemed unconscionable. The crying continued, growing more insistent. Through the thin walls, he could hear Aspen moving around in her bedroom, probably struggling to get out of bed with her body still recovering from labor. Before he could second-guess himself, Theo stood and made his way quietly down the hall. "I've got her," he called softly through the closed door. "Theo, you don't have to. I know, but I want to." In the nursery, Luna was working herself into a proper fury, her tiny face red with indignation. Theo lifted her carefully, noting how her weight already felt familiar in his arms. "What's wrong, little one?" he murmured, checking her diaper first. Dry. He'd watched enough YouTube videos on his phone over the past few hours to have absorbed the basics. Hungry Luna's response was to increase the volume of her complaints. Theo made his way to the kitchen, heating a bottle while trying to soothe her with gentle bouncing motions. The apartment felt different in the early morning darkness, more intimate, as if the shadows had stripped away the careful politeness that had characterized most of their interactions since the hospital. "Come on, Luna, work with me here," he whispered as she refused the bottle, turning her head away with surprising determination for someone less than 2 days old. "She does that sometimes." Aspen's voice behind him made him turn. She stood in the kitchen doorway wearing an oversized sleep shirt and the expression of exhausted resignation. "When she's tired, she fights the very thing that will help her feel better. Smart girl gets that from her mother." The words slipped out before he could stop them, carrying more warmth than he'd intended. Aspen's lips quirked in what might have been amusement, and the stubbornness comes from her father. She moved to the sink, filling a glass with water. Even in the dim light, Theo could see the careful way she held herself, favoring her left side, the reminder of everything she had endured while he was playing. Happy families with his sister's children sent guilt coursing through him anew. "You should be sleeping," he said. "Hard to sleep through a crying baby." She took a sip of water, studying his face. "Besides, I'm not used to having help. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "What kind of wrong?" "The kind where I wake up and discover this was all a stress-induced hallucination brought on by 18 hours of labor." Luna chose that moment to finally accept the bottle, her cries subsiding into contented sucking sounds. The sudden quiet felt profound after the intensity of her protests. "Does this feel like a hallucination?" Theo asked. Aspen watched him feed their daughter, and something shifted in her expression. "No, it feels complicated." They moved to the living room, where Aspen settled onto the couch with visible relief. Theo took the armchair across from her. Luna cradled against his chest as she worked through the bottle with single-minded determination. "Can I ask you something?" Aspen's voice was soft in the darkness. "Anything. That day in July when we had the fight about your father's will, did you leave because you didn't want the baby, or because you were scared of wanting her too much?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd spent months telling himself he'd left to protect them from his inevitable failures as a father. But sitting here in the quiet intimacy of Luna's feeding time, he couldn't hide behind those comfortable lies anymore. "Both," he admitted, "but mostly the second one." Aspen nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she'd suspected. "I knew you were scared. I just didn't understand why that had to mean running away. Because everyone I've ever loved, I've disappointed. My mother died thinking I was too much like my father to ever really love anyone more than I loved success. My father died knowing I'd rather sell his company than carry on his legacy. I have a perfect track record of letting people down when they need me most. So, you decided to get a head start with Luna. I decided to spare her the inevitable disappointment." Luna finished the bottle and immediately began fussing again. Theo lifted her to his shoulder, patting her back gently. When she let out a small burp, both parents couldn't help but smile. "You know what I think," Aspen said, tucking her legs beneath her on the couch. "What?" "I think you're giving yourself too much credit for being a disappointment, because the man who walked away from us 5 months ago, he wouldn't be here at 3 a.m. learning how to burp a baby. He wouldn't have asked about daycare costs or noticed that I was in pain. He definitely wouldn't have slept on an uncomfortable couch instead of going home to his own bed." Theo felt something loosen in his chest, a nod of self-remation that had been tightening for months. Maybe he said carefully. Or maybe I'm just good at fooling people for short periods of time. Maybe. But Luna doesn't know your track record. She doesn't care about your business reputation or your family history. All she knows is that her father is here right now, taking care of her when she needs it. As if responding to her mother's words, Luna settled more deeply into sleep against Theo's chest, her breathing evening out into the peaceful rhythm that seemed to reset the world around her. I used to lie awake at night during the pregnancy, Aspen continued, wondering what kind of father you'd be, whether you'd be patient with her when she cried, whether you'd read her bedtime stories, whether you'd show up to school plays and soccer games. And now I think maybe I was asking the wrong questions. Maybe it's not about what kind of father you'll be. Maybe it's about what kind of father you choose to become. Outside the living room windows, the first hints of dawn were beginning to light in the sky. Christmas Day was officially here, though it felt nothing like any Christmas either of them had experienced before. I want to be the kind of father she's proud of, Theo said quietly. Then be that father, starting right now with every choice you make. Don't wait until you feel ready or worthy or confident. Just show up every day. Luna stirred slightly in his arms, then settled back into sleep with the absolute trust that only babies possessed. Looking down at her perfect face, Theo realized that everything he'd thought mattered, his wealth, his reputation, his carefully constructed life, palled in comparison to this single sleeping person who carried half his DNA and all of his hopes for redemption. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. Neither do I, Aspen replied. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together. The possibility hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross, but both could see clearly for the first time in months. Christmas morning arrived with unexpected warmth, both outside and within the walls of Aspen's small apartment. Theo woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of soft humming coming from the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, he forgot where he was, why his back ached from sleeping on a couch, and why the sound of domesticity felt so foreign, yet so right. Then Luna's soft coos from the nursery brought everything flooding back. He found Aspen in the kitchen, moving slowly, but with more ease than the night before. She'd changed into jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out the flecks of gold in her tired eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she looked impossibly beautiful in the morning light streaming through the small window. Good morning, she said, not looking up from where she was preparing a bottle. Luna's been awake for about 20 minutes, just talking to herself. It's the sweetest sound. Theo listened and could indeed hear their daughter making small conversational noises from her crib. Not crying, just exploring the range of sounds she could produce. I'll get her, he offered, but Aspen shook her head. I've got it. You've done enough. She paused, bottle in hand. Actually, you've done more than enough. Thank you for staying, for helping, for showing up. The gratitude in her voice made his chest tight. After everything he'd put her through, the fact that she was thanking him for basic decency felt like both a gift and an indictment. As Aspen disappeared into the nursery, Theo's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Merry Christmas, baby brother. How's fatherhood treating you? He stared at the message, realizing he had no idea how to answer. How was fatherhood treating him? It had been less than 24 hours, but already his entire understanding of himself had shifted. The man who built his identity around control and achievement was discovering that loving someone this completely meant accepting complete vulnerability. A knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Firm, authoritative raps that suggested official business rather than friendly visits. Aspen, he called toward the nursery. Are you expecting someone? No. Theo moved to the door and peered through the peephole. A woman in her 50s stood in the hallway, holding a manila envelope and wearing the kind of neutral expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else on Christmas morning. Aspen read. The woman asked when Theo opened the door. She's busy with the baby. Can I help you? The woman consulted her paperwork. I have some documents that require her signature. Court-related. Theo's blood turned to ice. Court documents on Christmas Day, which could only mean one thing. Someone was taking legal action related to Luna. I'll sign for them, he said quickly. Sorry, sir. These have to go directly to Ms. Reed. Aspen appeared in the hallway, Luna cradled in her arms, looking confused by the commotion. What's going on, Ms. Reed? I have documents requiring your immediate attention. The woman extended the envelope with bureaucratic efficiency. Aspen shifted Luna to one arm and took the envelope with obvious reluctance. The moment she saw the return address, Her face went white. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. After the woman left, Theo closed the door and turned to find Aspen staring at the envelope like it might explode. "What is it?" he asked. "It's from your mother." The words hit him like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My mother died 15 years ago. Not your mother. Theo, Luna's grandmother." Aspen's hands were shaking as she held the envelope. "Your father's widow, Victoria Blackthorne." Theo felt the world tilt sideways. Victoria, his father's second wife, the woman who'd married into the Blackthorne fortune when Theo was already in college. They'd maintained a coldly cordial relationship since his father's death 3 years ago, communicating only through lawyers about estate matters. What could she possibly want with Luna? "I don't know. I can't open it." Aspen's voice cracked, and Luna began to fuss as if sensing her mother's distress. "Give it to me." Theo took the envelope, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Victoria had never shown interest in him as a stepson. The idea of her caring about his child seemed impossible unless she wanted something. The documents inside were official and terrifying. A petition for grandparental rights and a motion to establish paternity through the court system. "Jesus," Theo breathed, scanning the legal language. "What does it say?" "She's claiming that since I've been absent from Luna's life, and since there's no legal acknowledgement of paternity, she has the right to establish a relationship with her step-granddaughter." His voice grew harder with each word. "She's asking for court-ordered visitation." Aspen sank onto the couch. Luna clutched protectively against her chest. "Can she do that?" "She can try, but Aspen, this doesn't make sense. Victoria barely tolerated me when my father was alive. Why would she want anything to do with Luna? Maybe she's changed. Maybe becoming a step-grandmother." "No." Theo's voice was flat with certainty. "Victoria doesn't do anything without a strategic reason. There has to be an angle." He pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer's number, not caring that it was Christmas Day. Some emergencies transcended holidays. "Richard, it's Theo. I need you to look into something immediately. Victoria just served papers claiming grandparental rights to my daughter." "Your daughter?" Richard's voice carried surprise. "Theo, I wasn't aware you had a child." The words hung in the air like an accusation. His own lawyer didn't know about Luna because Theo had been so absent from her life that even the people closest to him had no idea she existed. "It's complicated, but I need to know what Victoria's real game is here." "Can you do some digging?" "Of course, but Theo, if she's claiming you've been absent and there's no legal acknowledgement of paternity, she might actually have a case." "When was the child born?" "Yesterday." "Yesterday." Richard's voice rose. "And when exactly did you acknowledge paternity?" Theo looked at Aspen, who was watching him with growing alarm. I haven't officially." The silence on the phone was deafening. "Theo, you need to get to family court first thing after the holiday. If you want to establish your parental rights before Victoria can complicate things further, you need to move fast." After ending the call, Theo sat beside Aspen on the couch. The legal documents spread between them like a roadmap to a battle neither had expected to fight. "I'm sorry," he said. "I brought this into your life, into Luna's life. How could you have known? I should have made things official months ago. I should have been there for the birth. Should have signed the birth certificate. Should have." He stopped himself before the litany of failures could continue. Luna had fallen back asleep in Aspen's arms, blissfully unaware that her first Christmas morning had brought news of a custody fight she was too young to understand, but old enough to be damaged by. "What do we do?" Aspen asked. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Theo felt the familiar surge of determination that had built his business empire. Someone was threatening his family. Someone thought they could use legal technicalities to insert themselves into Luna's life while he was still learning how to be her father. They were about to discover how wrong they were. "We fight," he said simply, "together, and we make sure that when this is over, no one will ever question my commitment to Luna again." Outside the apartment windows, Christmas morning in Brooklyn continued in peaceful domesticity. But inside, a war had just begun. The Blackthorne family estate in the Hamptons looked exactly as Theo remembered. Imposing, cold, and designed to intimidate anyone who dared approach its iron gates. He hadn't been here since his father's funeral 3 years ago, and returning now felt like walking into a carefully constructed trap. "Are you sure about this?" Aspen asked from the passenger seat of his Tesla, Luna sleeping peacefully in her car seat between them. "Maybe we should have waited for your lawyer. Richard will meet us at the courthouse tomorrow, but I need to know what Victoria is really after before we walk into that hearing." Theo's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the gates swung open. recognizing his car from the security system his father had installed years ago. And I need her to see that Luna has two parents who will fight for her. The decision to bring Aspen and Luna with him had been impulsive, driven by an instinct he didn't fully understand. But something about facing Victoria alone felt like accepting the narrative that he was still the disconnected, absent son she'd always treated him as. Victoria Blackthorne answered the door herself, which surprised him. At 58, she remained elegantly beautiful in the way that money and discipline could maintain. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled, despite it being the day after Christmas, and her cream-colored cashmere dress probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Theodore, her voice carried the same cool politeness it always had. I wasn't expecting a visit, really, because serving custody papers on Christmas morning felt like an invitation for a conversation. Victoria's gaze moved to Aspen in the baby carrier, and something flickered across her face, an expression too quick to interpret. Please come in, we have a great deal to discuss. The mansion's interior hadn't changed since Theo's childhood visits. Everything remained pristinely maintained and emotionally sterile, more museum than home. Victoria led them to the formal living room where a fire crackled in the marble fireplace and expensive artwork stared down at them from the walls. May I? Victoria gestured toward Luna's carrier. No, Aspen said immediately, surprising everyone, including herself with the force of the word. You may not? Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Well, perhaps we should address the legal matters first, then. Let's start with why, Theo said, settling beside Aspen on the leather sofa, while keeping himself between Victoria and Luna. Why you suddenly care about a granddaughter you've never met. Step-granddaughter, Victoria corrected smoothly, and I care because she's a Blackthorne, because family legacies matter, even when the current generation seems determined to abandon them. I haven't abandoned anything, haven't you? You walked away from a pregnant woman, missed the birth of your child, and until yesterday, showed no interest in establishing paternity. That sounds remarkably like abandonment to me. Each word landed like a precisely aimed arrow, and Theo felt Aspen tense beside him. Victoria had done her research, knew exactly which wounds would hurt the most. My relationship with Aspen and my commitment to Luna are none of your concern. On the contrary, when a Blackthorne heir is involved, it becomes very much my concern. Victoria moved to the bar cart and poured herself a crystal glass of what looked like very expensive whiskey. Especially when that heir stands to inherit a rather substantial trust fund. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. What trust fund? Theo's voice was dangerously quiet. The one your father established before he died for any future Blackthorne grandchildren. Victoria took a delicate sip of her drink. $50 million to be held in trust until the child reaches 30 with provisions for education, healthcare, and general welfare. In the meantime, Theo felt the world shift beneath him. You're lying. I'm many things, Theodore, but a liar isn't one of them. Your father may have been disappointed in you, but he never stopped hoping you'd eventually provide him with grandchildren to spoil. Victoria's smile was sharp as winter. Of course, the trust requires that the child be raised with proper understanding of Blackthorne family values and traditions, and you've appointed yourself as the guardian of those values. Someone has to. You've made it quite clear that you're more interested in playing house with your girlfriend than in providing your daughter with the advantages her birthright entails. Aspen spoke for the first time since they'd entered the room. What exactly are you proposing? Victoria's attention shifted to her, and Theo saw something calculating in the older woman's gaze. Shared custody, weekends, and holidays here, where Luna can learn about her heritage. Private tutors, proper etiquette, training, introduction to the social connections that will serve her throughout her life. She's 2 days old, Aspen said incredulously. It's never too early to begin proper development. I've already spoken with several excellent nannies who specialize in absolutely not. Theo stood abruptly, his composure finally cracking. You think you can buy your way into Luna's life? Use my father's money to manipulate us into giving you access. I think I can provide opportunities that a graphic designer's salary and a trust fund baby's guilt cannot. Victoria's mask of civility slipped slightly. Face facts. Theodore, you have no legal standing, no history of involvement, and no idea how to be a father. I, on the other hand, have resources, stability, and a vested interest in ensuring that Luna receives everything she's entitled to. Luna chose that moment to wake up, her soft cries filling the tension-heavy room. Aspen immediately lifted her from the carrier. and the baby settled against her mother's chest with the absolute trust of someone who knew she was safe. Watching them together, Theo felt something crystallize in his chest. This wasn't about money or family legacies or trust funds. This was about love in its purest form, the kind his father had never understood, the kind Victoria was constitutionally incapable of providing. "You want to know what Luna is entitled to," he said quietly. "She's entitled to parents who love her more than they love money. She's entitled to grow up knowing that her value isn't measured in trust funds or social connections. And she's entitled to be protected from people who see her as a commodity rather than a child." How noble and how naive. Victoria finished her drink and set the glass down with a sharp clink. But nobility doesn't pay for Harvard tuition or secure invitations to the right social events. I'm offering Luna access to a world that will serve her for life. And in exchange, she learns to be a proper Blackthorn, disciplined, sophisticated, aware of her responsibilities to the family name. Theo looked at Luna, now peaceful in Aspen's arms, and saw not a future socialite, but a tiny person who deserved to discover her own path, who deserved to be loved for who she was rather than who she might become. "Counterproposal," he said. "You withdraw the custody petition, and I'll ensure Luna knows about her grandfather's legacy when she's old enough to understand it. But she be raised by her parents in our home with our values." Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable. You see, Theodore, I've already filed the paperwork. The court will decide whether a trust fund baby and his unmarried girlfriend can provide better opportunities than an established member of society with unlimited resources." The threat was clear, and Theo realized that Victoria had been planning this moment since before Luna was born. She'd been waiting for him to prove his unworthiness as a father, and his 5-month absence had given her everything she needed. "Then I guess we'll see you in court," Aspen said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. Victoria smiled. "Yes, I suppose we will." Should be quite enlightening for everyone involved. As they prepared to leave, Theo caught Victoria watching Luna with an expression he couldn't quite read. For a moment, she looked almost wistful, but the impression passed so quickly he wondered if he'd imagined it. Walking back to the car, Luna safely strapped in her carrier, and Aspen's hand warm in his, Theo felt the weight of the battle ahead. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he also felt something else, the absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to protect his family, even if it meant destroying his own legacy in the process. The family court building on a gray January morning felt like a fortress designed to crush hope. Theo adjusted his tie for the third time, as he, Aspen, and their lawyer, Richard Chen, climbed the stone steps. Luna sleeping peacefully in Aspen's arms, blissfully unaware that her future was about to be decided by strangers. "Remember," Richard said quietly as they approached the courtroom doors, "Judge Martinez has a reputation for putting children's interests first. That works in our favor. But Victoria's team will argue that those interests include financial security and social advantages." Through the glass doors, Theo could see Victoria seated at the plaintiff's table with 2 attorneys, who looked like they charged more per hour than most people made in a month. She was dressed in navy blue conservative maternal designed to project stability and responsibility. "She looks like someone's grandmother," Aspen murmured, anxiety threading through her voice. "She looks like someone who's never changed a diaper in her life," Theo replied, "which is exactly what she is." But as they entered the courtroom, Theo couldn't shake the feeling that appearances might matter more than reality. In this sterile environment where Luna's future would be reduced to legal arguments and precedents, Judge Martinez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen every family tragedy imaginable. She listened patiently as Victoria's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Williamson, laid out their case. "Your Honor, my client seeks only what's best for baby Luna, Catherine Reed. Mrs. Blackthorn is prepared to offer educational opportunities, social advantages, and financial security that the current arrangements simply cannot provide." Williamson gestured toward documents on her table. "The child's father, Theodore Blackthorn, was absent for the entirety of the pregnancy and missed the birth entirely. He has no legal standing as a parent, having failed to sign the birth certificate or establish paternity. Meanwhile, a $50 million trust fund sits waiting to provide for Luna's future, but only if she's raised with proper understanding of her Blackthorn heritage." "And Mrs. Reed?" Judge Martinez asked, a struggling single mother working as a graphic designer, currently on unpaid maternity leave. "While we don't question her love for the child, We do question whether love alone is sufficient when superior alternatives exist. Theo felt his jaw clench as Luna was reduced to a case study and missed opportunities. Beside him, Aspen's grip tightened on their daughter, and he could see the fear in her eyes that the court might actually believe Victoria's version of their story. Mr. Chen, Judge Martinez turned to their attorney. Richard stood, his voice steady and confident. Your Honor, this case isn't about money or social advantages. It's about a woman who wants to use legal technicalities to insert herself into a child's life for her own purposes, not the child's benefit. He gestured toward Theo and Aspen. Mr. Blackthorne made mistakes, serious ones, but for the past 3 weeks since Luna's birth, he has been present every day, sharing night feedings, diaper changes, and all the ordinary moments that create the bond between parent and child. Actions, not legal documents, define parenthood. Objection, Williamson interrupted. 3 weeks of involvement doesn't erase 5 months of abandonment. Sustained, Judge Martinez said. Mr. Chen, please address the concerns about your client's previous absence and current legal standing. Richard nodded. Your Honor, Mr. Blackthorne is prepared to establish paternity today through DNA testing if necessary, though we believe his name on the hospital visitor logs and video evidence of his presence during Luna's care will suffice. As for his previous absence, we're prepared to address that directly. Judge Martinez looked at Theo. Mr. Blackthorne, I'd like to hear from you personally. Why should this court believe you're committed to this child when your actions suggest otherwise? Theo stood, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. This was the moment he'd been dreading and preparing for since Christmas morning. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, diaper disasters, and the overwhelming love that had reshaped his entire understanding of what mattered. Your Honor, I was absent because I was afraid. Afraid I'd be the same kind of father mine was, present in body, but absent in every way that mattered. My father measured love in dollar amounts and business achievements. I thought walking away was protecting Luna from that kind of emotional neglect. He glanced at Aspen, who nodded encouragingly, but holding my daughter, watching her sleep, seeing her look at me with complete trust, I realized I was wrong about everything. I can't guarantee I'll never make mistakes, but I can guarantee that I will never abandon her again, regardless of how afraid I am of failing her. Pretty words, Victoria's attorney interjected, but Mr. Blackthorne has a documented history of placing business interests above personal relationships. What happens when his next big deal requires his attention? Theo had been waiting for this moment. The one where he'd have to prove his commitment wasn't just emotional manipulation, but genuine transformation. Your Honor, I'd like to submit some documents to the court. Richard handed him a folder, and Theo's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Yesterday, I dissolved Blackthorne Enterprises and transferred all assets to a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers and families in crisis. I've kept enough to support my family comfortably, but I no longer own a business empire that could take me away from Luna. The courtroom erupted. Victoria shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. You did what? I chose my daughter over my inheritance, Theo said simply, because, unlike the trust fund Mrs. Blackthorne is offering, my love for Luna doesn't come with conditions about how she should be raised or who she should become. Judge Martinez studied the documents Richard had submitted. Mr. Blackthorne, you're telling this court that you've given up a multi-million-dollar business to prove your commitment to fatherhood. I'm telling the court that I've finally learned the difference between having money and being rich. I'd rather be Luna's father than a business success. I'd rather teach her about kindness than social connections. And I'd rather she grow up in a home filled with love than a mansion filled with expectations. Victoria was whispering urgently with her attorneys, but Theo could see the shock and fury on her face. She'd counted on his predictable priorities, on his inability to choose family over profit. Furthermore, Theo continued, Mrs. Blackthorne's interest in Luna began the moment she learned about the trust fund. She's never met Luna, never held her, never shown any interest in my life or happiness. This isn't about providing opportunities for my daughter. This is about controlling access to money. Judge Martinez was quiet for a long moment, studying all the parties involved. Luna had woken up during the proceedings and was making soft, contented sounds in Aspen's arms, completely unaware that her future was being decided. Mrs. Blackthorne, the judge said finally, given these new circumstances, do you wish to continue with your petition? Victoria's attorney leaned over to whisper something urgent in her ear. Victoria's face went through a series of emotions, fury, calculation, and finally what might have been resignation. I need time to reconsider my position, Your Honor. Motion dismissed, pending further review. Judge Martinez said, Mr. Blackthorne, I'm ordering immediate DNA testing to establish paternity, after which we'll schedule a hearing to formalize your parental rights. Until then, custody remains with Ms. Reed. As they filed out of the courtroom, Victoria caught Theo's arm. You've destroyed everything your father built, she said, her voice low and venomous. No, Theo replied, looking down at Luna, who was now awake and watching him with those serious dark eyes. I've finally built something worth keeping. Outside the courthouse, Aspen was crying, tears of relief and something that looked like pride. You gave up everything, she whispered. I gave up everything that didn't matter to gain everything that does. Theo gathered both Aspen and Luna into his arms, feeling more complete than he had in his entire life. I finally understand what my father never did. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you choose to protect while you're here. Luna made a soft sound that might have been agreement, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, Theo felt like the future was something to anticipate rather than fear. 8 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Theo's new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Brooklyn, 3 blocks from Aspen's place. The space was a far cry from his former penthouse, but as he sat in the rocking chair feeding Luna her morning bottle, he couldn't imagine anywhere he'd rather be. She's getting so big, Aspen said from the doorway, wearing one of his old Columbia t-shirts and a smile that still had the power to stop his breath. In the weeks since the court hearing, they'd been carefully rebuilding something that felt both familiar and entirely new. Theo had officially established paternity, signed every document that made Luna legally his daughter, and slowly, cautiously, he and Aspen had been rediscovering each other. Dr. Peterson says she's gained 2 pounds since Christmas, Theo replied, marveling as always at how Luna's tiny hand wrapped around his finger with such determined strength. And she's definitely inherited your stubborn streak. My stubborn streak? She's the one who refuses to sleep unless she's being held by her father. Aspen settled onto the arm of his chair, her fingers trailing through Luna's soft, dark hair. Speaking of which, you look exhausted. I look happy, he corrected. There's a difference. And it was true. The bone-deep exhaustion of new parenthood was nothing like the hollow fatigue he'd carried for years while building his business empire. This tiredness came from purpose, from love made tangible in middle-of-the-night feedings, and the endless cycle of diapers, bottles, and stolen moments of wonder. Luna finished her bottle and immediately began the urgent fussing that meant she needed to burp. Theo lifted her to his shoulder with movements that had become second nature, patting her back gently while she worked through the serious business of digestion. I have news, Aspen said, a note in her voice that made him look up sharply. Good news or bad news? Good, definitely good. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. The family court called yesterday. Victoria officially withdrew her petition for grandparental rights. Relief flooded through him so suddenly, he had to close his eyes for a moment. The threat that had hung over them since Christmas Day was finally, officially over. Did she say why? Apparently, her lawyers advised her that with your paternity established and your financial situation changed, she no longer had legal grounds for claiming Luna needed her intervention. Aspen's smile turned slightly mischievous. Also, Richard may have mentioned that you were prepared to countersue for harassment if she continued pursuing custody. Luna let out a satisfying burp against his shoulder, followed by a contented sigh that made both parents laugh. So, it's over, Theo said, hardly daring to believe it. It's over. Luna is officially, legally, completely ours. The word ours hung between them, loaded with implications. They'd both been dancing around for weeks. They'd been co-parenting beautifully, had found their rhythm as a family unit. But the question of what they were to each other beyond Luna's parents remained carefully unexamined. Aspen, Theo began, but she pressed her finger to his lips. Before you say anything, I need to tell you something. She moved to face him fully, her blue eyes serious. These past 8 weeks, watching you with her, seeing how you've changed, I've been falling in love with you all over again. His breath caught. Aspen, I'm not finished. I've been falling in love with the man you've become, but also remembering why I fell for the man you were. You were never as broken as you believed, Theo. You were just afraid, and watching you choose love over fear, choose us over everything else you thought mattered, it's been the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Luna had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her warm weight, a perfect anchor in a moment that felt too precious to be real. I love you, he said simply. I loved you when I walked away, and I loved you when I came back, and I'll love you every day for the rest of my life. But more than that, I like who I am when I'm with you. I like the father I become when Luna looks at me, and I like the man I am when you smile. Is that a proposal, Mr. Blackthorne? It's a promise. A proposal comes later, when I can put Luna down long enough to get on one knee properly. He shifted carefully, reaching into his pocket with his free hand. But I might have bought something just in case. Aspen's eyes widened as he pulled out a small velvet box. Not the massive diamond he would have chosen 6 months ago when he'd thought love should be measured in carats and cost. This was simpler, more elegant, a vintage Art Deco ring with a modest diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires, the exact color of her eyes. Theo, I'm not asking you to marry me today. I'm asking if you think someday when we're ready, you might want to, because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you and Luna in every single day of it. Luna stirred slightly in her sleep, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. What did babies dream about? Theo wondered. Warmth and food and the voices of people who loved them. If so, Luna's dreams would be filled with good things. Yes, Aspen whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. Someday, when we're ready. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with his free hand, an awkward maneuver that made them both laugh. It fit perfectly. Catching the morning light and throwing tiny rainbows across Luna's sleeping face. I have something else to tell you, Theo said, about the foundation. I started with the business assets. What about it? I want to name it after her, the Luna Catherine Foundation for Families in Crisis, because she saved us. Aspen, she brought me home. Aspen leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promises about their future. When they broke apart, Luna was watching them with those serious dark eyes, as if she approved of the entire arrangement. Do you think she knows? Aspen asked softly. Knows what? That she's the most wanted, most loved little girl in the world. Theo looked down at his daughter, at this perfect small person who had changed everything simply by existing. Luna blinked slowly, then yawned, completely unimpressed by the magnitude of the love surrounding her. I think she knows exactly what she needs to know, he said. That we're here, that we're staying, that she's home. Outside the Brooklyn apartment, the world continued its complicated dance of heartbreak and hope, success and failure, love found and love lost. But inside, a family had discovered something precious, that the best gifts aren't the ones that cost the most, but the ones that transform you in the giving. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those gifts arrive on Christmas Eve, wrapped in a pink hospital blanket, carrying everything you never knew you needed. 3 years later, Christmas Eve, the brownstone in Park Slope was alive with the controlled chaos of a family Christmas. Luna, now a determined 3-year-old with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, stood on a step stool in the kitchen, helping Aspen frost sugar cookies by eating more frosting than she applied. Daddy, look, Luna called as Theo walked in from the living room where he'd been wrestling with the lights on their Christmas tree. I made a star. Theo examined the lopsided cookie with the seriousness it deserved. That's the most beautiful star I've ever seen. Baby girl, almost as beautiful as the one who made it. Luna giggled and threw her frosting-covered arms around his neck, leaving sticky fingerprints on his sweater. He didn't mind. These days, most of his clothes bore the evidence of toddler affection. How's the tree coming? Aspen asked, wiping Luna's hands with a damp cloth while trying not to smile at the frosting in her daughter's dark curls. Let's just say our daughter inherited more than your eyes. She also got your complete disregard for following directions. Theo gestured toward the living room, where Luna had helped him hang ornaments by clustering them all on the bottom 3 branches within her reach. It's perfect, Aspen declared, and she meant it. Their life looked nothing like the magazine spreads of his former penthouse, but it felt like everything a home should be: warm, slightly messy, and absolutely full of love. The Luna Catherine Foundation had grown beyond anything Theo had imagined when he'd started it. They'd helped over 3,000 families in crisis, providing everything from emergency housing to job training to childcare support. The irony wasn't lost on him that walking away from his business empire had led to the most meaningful work of his life. Mama, tell the story, Luna demanded, climbing down from her step stool and tugging at Aspen's apron. What story, sweetheart? The Christmas story about how Daddy found us. It had become Luna's favorite bedtime story, though they'd edited it considerably for a 3-year-old audience. In Luna's version, Daddy had been lost and sad until Christmas Angel sent him a picture of his baby, and then he followed his heart home. Well, Aspen began, settling Luna on her lap while Theo leaned against the counter. Once upon a time, there was a daddy who forgot how to find his way home. As Aspen told their story, transforming their painful separation and reunion into a fairy tale of love conquering fear, Theo watched his wife and daughter and marveled at the unexpected turns that had led them here. Last year, he'd finally gotten down on one knee properly in this same kitchen. Actually, while Luna napped and Aspen was making her grandmother's apple pie recipe. The wedding had been small, just family and close friends held in the community garden where they'd taken Luna for her first steps. Victoria had sent a gift, a children's savings bond, and a brief note that simply said, "For Luna's future, whatever she chooses it to be." It wasn't an apology, but it felt like acceptance, and sometimes that was enough. "And then what happened?" Luna asked, though she knew the ending by heart. "Then Daddy realized that the best presents don't come in pretty boxes," Aspen continued. "They come in small hands that hold yours and sleepy sighs against your shoulder, and hearts big enough to hold all the love in the world. And we all lived happily ever after," Luna announced with the satisfaction of a story well told. "We're still living it," Theo added, swooping Luna up and spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. "Every single day." Later, after Luna had been tucked into her bed with no fewer than 7 stuffed animals in 3 bedtime stories, Theo and Aspen sat on their living room couch, watching the lights twinkle on their beautifully imperfect Christmas tree. "Any regrets?" Aspen asked, curled against his side with her head on his shoulder. Theo thought about it seriously. Did he miss the power lunches and boardroom victories, the penthouse with its view of the city, the respect that came with being worth hundreds of millions of dollars? "Only one," he said finally. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize that this." He gestured around their warm lived-in living room, toward the stairs where their daughter slept, peacefully toward the woman in his arms who'd forgiven him for being human and flawed and afraid. "This is what success actually looks like." Snow began to fall outside their windows, dusting the Brooklyn streets with Christmas magic. Somewhere in the city, other families were celebrating, other couples were falling in love, other people were discovering what truly mattered when everything else fell away. But here, in this brownstone filled with cookie crumbs and toddler toys, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches, Theo Blackthorne had found something more valuable than any fortune he'd ever imagined. He'd found his way home, and sometimes, on quiet Christmas Eve when Luna was sleeping and Aspen was warm in his arms, he could swear he heard the echo of Christmas angels laughing, delighted by the messy, beautiful miracle they'd helped create with 1 accidentally sent photograph and 2 hearts brave enough to forgive. Some people believe that Christmas miracles are reserved for movies and fairy tales. Others know that the most powerful magic happens in ordinary moments. In hospital rooms and small apartments, in the choice to stay when leaving would be easier, in the courage to love someone more than you fear losing them. Luna, Catherine Blackthorne, came into the world on Christmas Eve. But her real gift wasn't her arrival. It was the way she taught to broken people that love isn't something you fall into. It's something you choose every day in 1,000 small ways that add up to a lifetime. Would you have made the same choice Theo did, giving up everything you'd worked for to prove your love was real? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.